Good morning. So I want to do a recap of last night's Symbaroum session 11. We used the rules from the Symbaroum box set called Treasure Hunts in the Davacar. So I used a modified version of this in session 1 to get them into the Davacar to my session location in the very first session, but it was heavily modified hex crawl version of those rules just to get them to the scene in the very first session of Symbaroum. Now I've owned the Crawl rule book since the year it came out. I think it was I want to say 2018, 2019. I can't remember exactly when Symbaroum came out. And I ran 6 sessions for the local guys. And it feels like a completely different game using those hex crawl rules than the core book. So for me, the core book is ultimately the setup is interludes. You set the scene, describe the travel, describe the situation, etc. And then scenes are entered to resolve a conflict or to create an opportunity where players can get information, make dice rolls, enter combat, etc. So it definitely has a feel for me of a more narrative prepared style game. And this quite literally assumes you're going to be going into the most dangerous place in this world, the Davacar Forest. And every single day, there are 3 things that occur in the rules. Someone is your guide, or one of the PCs in the party will play the guide if they have the bushcraft ability. They must make 3 daily rolls, 4 if they fail a bushcraft check. So you make an orientation check to make sure you're moving along in the direction you want to go. And of course, the GM would provide description of them moving through the hex, 20 kilometers, roughly, maybe less per day. I would definitely say less per day in the Davacar, but the gist is it roughly a hex per day. And they must roll, or because they make all the rolls, there are 3 guaranteed rolls: orientation roll, an enemies table roll, and a ruins table roll. Because the goal of the starter set is they're treasure hunters and they're trying to find ruins. So let's say day 1 they set off into the Davacar, and we roll orientation. They do okay. They get where they get, into the forest. They don't get lost. They don't suffer a misfortune, which would be the 4th roll you would have to do if they failed that orientation check. Then you roll simultaneously enemies and ruins. The enemies can occur anytime in that particular day. I can hold them back and introduce them anytime during their adventure, or couple them with the ruins if it makes sense. And of course, last night, both ruins that were rolled, I coupled the enemy with the ruin. It just made sense. That's what was in this location. And I foreshadowed yesterday in looking these rules over closely and realizing that every single day there's not a roll. So in Dungeons and Dragons, wandering monsters occur 1 in 6 or 1 in 8, which is 12% chance that you're going to encounter something random, or a 16% chance that you're going to encounter a random monster. Well, in Symbaroum's hex crawl, the Davacar is far more dangerous, as there's only a 20% chance that you won't encounter anything. Okay, so it's a gigantic difference. Now, how well the guide succeeds in his orientation roll will give a modifier to that, trying to lower the odds of running into a particular ruin or a particular set of enemies. And of course, the chart's enemies get more dangerous the higher the roll. The enemies table must be rolled daily. The ruins table is rolled daily. The orientation roll for travel is rolled daily. And if you fail the orientation roll, they must suffer a misfortune roll. And all that can happen. So that's pretty much 3 guaranteed rolls, 1 misfortune check. Very dangerous. So when this talks about, when the core rules talk about what the Davokar is and the corruption and the danger, there's in the Symbaroum book, it talks a lot about that. You get a sense of that from looking at the monsters and etc. and the lore. But because there is no hex crawl idea that you're going to do this kind of hex crawling, Symbaroum definitely sends, the core book to me sends a different message about what we're doing, which I really enjoy. Again, idea of interludes, setting up scenes with a more crafted evening's entertainment, a more crafted experience. For instance, they're going to go to Malima and they're going to investigate an elf, right? It was the setup. But I knew they weren't going to make it, not because they would die, but because it was just going to be way too much happening. So we were going to do a hex crawl. And if they somehow managed to navigate 8 days travel to get to Malima, then we would have started the investigation of Malima. But it was an excuse for them to try to travel from Thistlehold to Malima and experience the hex crawl portion. Okay. So understand there's 2 caveats to this. One, it plays 100%. To me, it plays completely differently. The threat level using the hex crawl Davokar rules is tenfold more dangerous than just a kind of a written adventure for Symbaroum. Okay. Second, these are designed that your party's looking for treasure. So the very first hex could produce a ruin that produces treasure, and then we can turn around and go home. So this idea that they were going to travel 8 to 10 days, in the hex crawl without event was not going to happen. It was going to be nigh impossible. It was a 20% chance on a daily basis they wouldn't encounter anything. Very, very poor odds. All right. Either way, that's what we're doing. We set out. So they get geared up. They collect all their gear, their tents, their backpacks, their shovels, their picks, their food, their cooking utensils. There are 3 PCs and a NPC apprentice to Dell's character Thariah, who's a changeling staff mage. We've got Kubela, who's a treasure hunter, and we have Malleus, who is a warrior. Taro, of course, my character is guarding the army stables in exchange for armor and weapons. So Taro used a contact and is exchanging his time and labor for new armor, new equipment, because they needed it. Both Malleus and Taro had lost armor, had lost equipment during the last couple of sessions. So it's a way of paying off for army surplus gear. Okay. Session starts with Malleus returning a response to the Chamberlain. The Chamberlain has sent them a missive saying, I know who murdered my son and daughter-in-law and tried to kill my grandchildren. And it's an elf in the Davokar. My agents tell me he's roughly around the town of Malima, about 8 days traveled into the Davokar. And I want you to hunt him down. I want you to kill him and bring me back evidence he's dead as payment for everything I've done for you. And Malleus writes a missive back saying, we are agreed. We are heading out, and we'll take care of this. And he finds a courier, pays the courier Thaler, and sends a courier off to Yendarus, to the Chamberlain, letting the Chamberlain know they are on the job. They pack up, they head into the Davokar. And I tried to foreshadow how remarkably dangerous this is. And this was a bit difficult in the sense that our Symbaroum sessions to this point have been more the narrative, have been a little more narrative with interludes and scenes. We have not used these hex crawl rules. And I knew immediately from perusing the rules for this starter set that this was going to be far more violent. This was going to be a session in which they could flee enemies, they could negotiate with some enemies, but there was a good chance they were going to be in some version of a tension, conflict every single day. Okay, not counting potential misfortunes. So I foreshadowed as they enter the area there out of Thistlehold, they cross the fire break, about 400, 800 yard fire break, into the trees, the Davokar, to the staging area where most teams launch. and where the Queen's army has kind of a staging area set up there. And they see all of these wounded and dead being carried back, some toward Thistlehold on stretchers. And David Malleus stops a young soldier and says, what's happened here? And so I was trying to foreshadow how dangerous this was going to be. And the army, the young army, Queen's army soldier tells Malleus that there is a small clan village just northwest of this location that has been harassed by a pack of wild meerkats that are extremely aggressive, and the army traveled over there to basically help this small village of barbarian, the clan of barbarians, friendly barbarian clan, local, and were decimated by these meerkats. And that was meant to foreshadow to them, this isn't going to be the Symbaroum that you guys have been accustomed to. It's going to be more dangerous. But how effective that was, I don't know. Foreshadowing. Not to mention if they wanted to head northwest and investigate this small village that's being harassed by these meerkats, they certainly could put on their hero bonnets and head off, right? Hero hats, right? Malleus and the crew decide, no, we got a job to do. Let's get on it. And Cabello successfully guides them to their first on their first days route with a good orientation check. It leads to an enemy's roll of robbers, PCs plus. So there was supposed to be PC plus 2. There were 3 PCs, and with plus 2 is 5. So 5 robbers, according to the chart. So they ran into 5 robbers at a ruins roll that Dell's character made. The ruins roll was a broken down old bridge with old towers, in an old dry riverbed. So I described how they were moving up this old riverbed to this old ruined bridge that had collapsed. They were kind of in the river itself around this collapsed bridge with towers on each side of the old river. And they made vigilance checks. They all spotted activity around them. They heard hoots and whistles. Malleus was able to assess as a former army soldier that these hoots and whistles were communication from some humanoid and it was actually a human, whistling and giving hoot commands, call and response across the river. And they were ultimately then, for the most part, surrounded to some degree. They took cover. Cabello was able to sprint across the riverbed into some brush unseen. So he was kind of hidden in the brush on the right side of the shore of the old dried up riverbed. Malleus parlayed to the gentleman on top of the tower who was hooting and pointing, giving physical arm gesture commands to his men. He said, lay down all your valuables and to pay toll for their bridge, which was, kind of a joke since the bridge is out and there is no river. Malleus says, basically, over your dead body. About this time, he sees 3 of these robbers coming up from the direction they came, kind of sealing off a retreat. There was one on the tower giving commands and kind of overwatching everything. And there was one hidden in the brush that was sneaking up on Thariah and the boy who had hidden in the rocks and the bushes. Melee ensues. Malleus takes on 3, the 3 that were coming up the trail. The one on top was still ultimately out of combat, watching and making hoots and whistles. Thariah changed into a bird and flew up to the tower to harass the guy on the tower. And Cabello hid in the bushes, throwing his stilettos and throwing rocks. Malleus very quickly waylays 2 of these very inept, pathetic robbers. These were robbers off my chart. So I told them before the game starts, gentlemen, I'm going to use a combination of the charts in the actual book and my charts. So they couldn't, just in case they had the charts in front of them, or just in case, I wanted them to have some mystery. Although the mystery, they know they're rolling for enemies. They know they're rolling for ruins. They know they're rolling for orientation. Takes some of that mystery out, but it's a player-facing game. So it's a slightly more administrative in that sense, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm okay with playing role-playing games as games, right? And the role play is still there. The events, the story still unfolds, still emergent. But I warned them before session, not whatever they roll. It's a combination of maybe my monsters might be slightly different for the region, and my misfortunes chart is completely different. I used my own. I wrote up my entire own misfortunes chart that was not from the book. And then I used the ruins directly from the book. So I didn't write up my own ruins. I thought, why do that? These descriptions and things are great, but I wanted my monsters to be slightly different. So those are a little different. And then I used the my own misfortunes chart. Okay, but I followed the same mathematical numbers: 10 misfortunes, 20 results for monsters, 20 results for the ruins. Okay. Thariah manages to harass the one on the and force him off of the tower. He falls to his death in the riverbed below. Malleus waylays these three, and Cabello chucks a rock to try to help Bonner, as Bonner's surprised by one who comes out of the brush with a club and is trying to kill the young apprentice. And Cabello heaves a rock into that fray and unfortunately hits Bonner as he missed his melee roll. I mean, he missed his missile roll. He threw stilettos first to help Malleus and missed both of those, missing Malleus, by a bit. And then he threw a rock. He scooped up, and right before he threw it, he made a cunning check, and he spotted that there was a vein of gold, like a vein of gold in this rock. That was foreshadowing the potential treasure find that could be around here, right? He did a double take and then went ahead and threw it. Unfortunately, he missed, but he hit. Because he missed, I had him make a defense. I had Dale make a defense roll for Bonner to be missed by this rock. This rock struck Bonner very viciously in the head, almost killing him, knocking him down. Malleus steps from waylaying his three, steps into the fray with the robber about to kill Bonner, and is able to finish him off with one big blow. And they've defeated these robbers. And again, there was a moment where they told them, surrender your valuables, and that'll pay passage, and you can go. And they chose not to surrender their valuables to this cultural opportunity. There would have been a chance, and there was a morale check. I made a persuade. I gave Malleus a persuasion with advantage check twice in the combat to scare these lowly robbers off. He had 2 of those checks, and again, the robbers ran. They were able to catch them and kill them all but one which ran off in the very first turn, badly wounded. But they were able to finish him off. They decided to camp here at the tower of these robbers. Dell lands on the tower, changes back into his form, and roots through this bucket of these rocks. And he makes a lore check, or a lore master check, I believe, one of the two, and discovers these rocks are pyrite. They are fool's gold. So these robbers has been digging up and putting in a big bucket with ore that they thought was going to make them rich, gold or something, but it was pyrite. Rocks riddled with veins of pyrite. They stay the night there. The next morning, they head off northeast. The orientation roll goes great again, and Cabello navigates the team from a darker Davokar, thicker, denser woods down into a ravine, which was rolled on the ruins chart. So the ravine, which was a temple ruin with lots of potential treasure, was Dell's role. And I described how they're in this ravine, and in the face of this rocky ravine, they come across an old temple mouth door. Dell makes a lore master check, and he's able to discern that it's an old elven temple facade, but a cave. They tried to nurse the boy Bonner through the night, and because he could not, Thariah could not give him TLC and keep him asleep. He could not recover a hit point, so Bonner is still concussed. He is down to 2 toughness. He did not heal his 1 point. None of these guys have healing, medicus, herbs. They have no way of healing other than straight rest. So very, very dangerous for this group to be hex crawling in the Davokar, trying to get to a location. Okay, so instead of pushing on, they decide to rest with the boy. Malleus decides he's going to TLC the boy while they go inside this old temple and investigate. Well, as they enter, they realize, no, it was the elves had just put a nice facade around the cave opening to look like but it was a natural cave, and they wound their way into this cave, which was a temple/tomb. And they move their way through this temple/tomb, torch in hand for Cabello, Thariah following with his staff, Malleus and the boy outside, as Malleus nurses the boy, trying to get him to rest. Again, they make a fell roll to persuade the boy to sleep. Thariah threatens an intimidation, basically, again, Dell threatening an intimidation check, so to speak, which is not, which would have been persuasion, but I'm using persuasion for them to get the boy to relax and rest, right, as he's concussed. And of course, David unfortunately fails this persuasion check. Okay. It's part of what I love about Symbaroum are their attributes can cover a wide range of things. And the idea of persuasion, as you're trying to, he took a cold, gave him some water and administered a damp cloth on his head. And they had no way to really doctor the wounds. They just were able to bandage him up, so to speak. Anyway, they enter a larger cavern that the far end is caved in. I describe it's about 30 feet wide with alcoves. They can see 3 alcoves on the right side of the walls and 2 alcoves on the left side of the walls. But the back half of this cave is collapsed in, blocking some of the alcoves. So it's like a big chamber that's now collapsed in. They feel sticky on the floor. Again, I tried to foreshadow. They could see some scurrying in the dark from the torchlight. They could feel a little stickiness on the floor. And they spotted something looked like pods or eggs. Cabello investigates. So I tried to foreshadow some movement, some stuff going on. So if they wanted to step away and get out of here, they could do so without encounter. Cabello decides to double check what are these things and investigate. And that triggered a surprise attack by a predatorial eder herd, which are a pack, are spiders that hunt. Predatorial small spiders that hunt in a pack. Pretty dangerous, pretty scary, as they're poisonous. They don't do a lot of damage. Everything in the game generally takes roughly 10 points of damage before dying. There's no such thing as mooks in Symbaroum. Now you can make mooks. Matter of fact, the robbers, I made mooks. On my table, I had the robbers were mooks. They only had, they did not have 10 toughness, right? Which is why David could waylay them with 7 or more points, generally 8 or more points. So they were my robbers mooked down a little bit. So my charts were a little more customized monsters, not so much straight from the book. The eder herd, though, came off the enemy chart that David rolled for this location or for this day, and I put them in this tomb. I foreshadowed that there was something moving around. There was something sticky on the floor. There was a pod or looked like an egg sac. And they decided to stay one more moment and investigate. And these are predatorial ambush creatures. And the way I described them moving around them, I was hoping to cue them that the creatures were trying to surround them and ambush them. And Dell's character says, I'm going to step back. Or Dell says, I'm going to step backward. I'm going to retreat backward out of the mouth of this place. And he has to make the creature makes a discreet versus his vigilant check. He fails the vigilance check. It gets a surprise attack on him. I describe it as scurries up the back of his leg and makes a roll to try to bite him. He fails his defense check. The creature bites him in the back of the leg, injects him with venom or with poison. Dell is hurt and suffering. The second spider, as Cabello starts to retreat, same thing. It comes scurrying out after Cabello. Cabello says, I'm going to flee. Instead of an opportunity attack, the creature working as a pack, I thought, you know what? There's a chance this creature is going to go after the one they've already got. Why would it try to scamper after a torch wielding healthy enemy when Dell's character is already under duress? So I said, let's make an odd even check. If he rolled even, he's safely able to flee the room, and the creature will change targets and head toward Dell. He rolled even. And Dell fails a defense check. This creature up the front of his legs and drives its fangs into Dell's abdomen, injecting him with more poison. So Dell's character Thariah now has a couple of these fist-sized, softball-sized spiders, eder herd, on him. Cabello, without a torch, he throws the torch down and runs in the dark, fleeing. And so I have him make basically a cunning check to avoid stumbling, tripping, falling in the dark. There's only one passage, but it has right turns, left turns, and he's now running completely in the dark. And sure enough, he trips, falls to his knees. I describe he tripped over something. And we come back out to Malleus. Malleus again hears this scrambling and echo up from Cabello. He recognizes Cabello, kind of an oof, echoing up the cave. So at that point, Malleus gets up and starts to head into the mouth of the cave, torch lit. Cabello rolls over and finds he's stumbled in the dark, kicking loose from the rubble and the refuge, or the debris from the walls of this cavern, a stone box. He scoops it up in hand and races through the dark out, bumping into Malleus, coming into the cave. He explains to Malleus, poor Thariah, he's been waylaid by spiders. I'm afraid he's a goner. Dell's making death saves. His first death save buys him a turn. Malleus races through the darkness, torch in hand, to get to Thariah, comes in just in time for Dell to fail his final death. It's called death test. He rolls a 20, which means he immediately dies. So Thariah, Dell describes how Thariah dies. And Malleus steps up right as he fails that roll. He can tell from the torch laying on his chest burning, because Thariah had a moment to pick up the torch before he died, succumbed to an attack on the second round. Drops the torch basically onto his own chest. So he lay there, eyes open, dead or dying from the poison. He ends up ultimately dying. The torch burning through his chest. Malleus waves the torch around, recognizes Thariah is a goner, and then he quickly escapes the chamber. I described that Malleus quickly waving the torch around can make out there are boxes, there's old furniture. This place could still house treasure, and indeed, this particular ruins has a pretty fat treasure, potential treasure. They leave the tunnel, and that was 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 5 minutes in or something, and we decided right there well, actually, Cabello opens the stone box, discovers it's a doll of a Symbaroum noble, which is the ancient race that occupied this world before elves and everybody showed up, and it has golden needles protruding from it. So it's like it's like a Symbaroum noble voodoo doll with golden needles protruding from it. So he's got this doll with golden needles. Puts the stone lid back on, packs the box up. Malleus comes out and says, wow, what are we going to do? And fade to black. We had a nice post-mortem conversation about not only this experience. We talked a little bit about Symbaroum, the hex crawl experience. We talked a little bit about whether, I'll run the next session like a part 2 of this, where we can either continue the hex crawl, or we can go back to kind of the traditional Symbaroum core, where I would give an interlude as to how they travel to Malima, where they could begin an investigation to try to find this elf that they're supposed to be, assassinating for the Chamberlain. Okay. Sorry, it's early here. I'm having coffee. So, I don't know what we decided. I can't recall what we decided. I have to watch the video back. Again, the post-mortem discussions on the end of our AP video. And again, we talk about this. It felt completely different game, and it should, because this is but here's the thing. So if I didn't buy Symbaroum's core and I just bought this starter set, which is amazing quality, the book outlines all the character stuff, character traits, how to make a character. It comes with pre-made characters, comes with 2 great maps, and it comes with a great settings and adventures book, which has this expedition rules, hex crawl rules. So it is, and a set of dice. It's a fantastically priced starters box, which gives you plenty of play, but it basically just teaches you the game as an old school hex crawling game. It's got a few monsters. It's got all the monsters that show up on these tables are in the book, so you don't need any other monsters, any other core books or anything. However, it limits the monsters to just this book, which is another reason I made my own charts for this, because I've got both the Symbaroum core and the Symbaroum monster book. So this doesn't, include a ton of stuff. It's a basic box. It's a starter box, and it's fantastic. But if this was your first experience with Symbaroum, I think you would get a completely different sense of WoW. Number one, old school, very lethal. I mean, every single day, the odds that you're going to encounter an enemy doesn't mean you're going to fight them all. Some enemies are not necessarily hostile, But for the most part, yeah, you're probably going to be waylaid. And again, the sense of that is you're trying to do an expedition and you're looking for treasure. So day one, you could get oriented and discover a decent ruin, and it turns out in that ruin are some robbers, and you waylay those robbers, and you excavate for the rest of the day, or you excavate for camps. You camp overnight, excavate one more day, dig up all the treasure you can find, and go back. And that would be it, right? That would be a day. That would be a Saturday matinee, hex crawl Symbaroum game with your buddies, or Friday night. So it works, but it is completely different. It invites a completely different experience than how I've enjoyed Symbaroum initially, locally, and also Symbaroum over the last 10 sessions with the guys. I argue Symbaroum to me deserves a little more depth than just that. But I wanted to try these rules as, not to say as written, because I did use some of my own charts, but for the most part, the math was as written, right? The odds of encountering enemies was the same. I used the same ruin chart, the same treasure chart. I used the same misfortune odds, and I used the same misfortune number. I just made my own misfortunes that were, for me, more tangibly interesting as far as describing them. And they didn't have a misfortune. Cabello did a great job navigating for the first 2 days. So last night's session, 2 hours, only 2 days into the Davokar. And again, the core book describes how dangerous the Davokar is, but how lucrative it can be, which is why adventurers do it. That's why they risk their lives to go to find these ruins and excavate treasure. And this has the starter set has excavation rules, which are very cool. They set camp and they excavate, digging and looking for treasure, which we've not really been able to do traditionally. I simulated that when Cabello tripped on his way out of the dungeon, on his way out of the tomb. He tripped. That simulated an excavation roll. So his stumbling over the stone box with the doll in it was technically that failed cunning check where he stumbled in the dark ended up being an excavation check. So very simple, right? We don't have to make it a boring old digging with shovels. We can have them find treasure just by investigating the ruins, or tripping in the dark, or discovering them with the in the eggs, surrounded by webs and eggs, in them too. Great fun, loved it. I'm not saying I would not play Symbaroum solely this way, but it's a different game, much different. Matter of fact, it becomes just a hex crawl treasure hunting game, which is great fun, very simple, great way to get started. But it would leave a group of people, if they didn't know anything else about the core rules and the sense of interludes with scenes and more deliberate. Now, this does have a module in it, which would cue apart a group of players, a table of players. That Symbaroum is deeper than just a hex crawl. So, by the way, it does have, I think, 2 adventures are in this book, or one. It might be 1 epic adventure or 2. I can't remember. I don't use pre-written material, so I don't even look at that stuff. I have zero interest in pre-written material. I always make my own, or I always roll random tables to create, to see what happens, right? So yesterday ultimately ended up random tables. Day 1, random ruins, random monster. Day 2, random the ruins roll, the enemy roll. I combined enemies with the actual ruins because it made sense. Broken down old bridge with towers. Only 1 treasure could be found around there, and 5 robbers. Perfect. This is an ambush site. They're trying to steal. They're trying to goad treasure hunters or explorers into paying a toll on a dead bridge, basically. And then the temple with spiders made complete sense, as it's a ruin. So it works great. Our first death in game, Thariah was our first character death, as he succumbed. Had his armor soaked better on the 2 bites from the 2 spiders, he would have lived on probably 1 more round. The poison does 2 points of damage, ignoring armor. Of course, it's poison, for 2 rounds, which means 1 bite, he was going to suffer 4 points of poison damage. He was bitten twice, so he was going to suffer 8 plus the bites. His armor soaks gave up a couple of points both times, and then he suffered 4 more. He ended up falling unconscious in the death test phase. His first death test provided him more time. By the third turn, Malleus, racing down the corridor, comes to him as he fails his final death test and succumbs. to the so Thariah will return to the earth as his changelings believe that it's what happens. They're supposed to return to the earth. So he's going to ultimately fulfill his destiny, returning to the earth to be recycled in the world of Symbaroum and the Davokar. Malleus and Cobello survive, and whether we continue with the part 2 or whether they just want to hightail it back to Thistlehold and give this up. Now they really are obliged. They are obliged to do this work for the Chamberlain, as the Chamberlain has provided them a free home in Thistlehold. He has also paid all their fines from their legal their adverse when they were of course found. They've lost their rights of citizenship to explore the Davokar legally. This session started, the Chamberlain deputized them in behalf of the Queen to hunt down this elf, but that's the only way they could be in the Davokar without suffering fines from Queen's Rangers, etc., or paying heavy taxes when they return to Thistlehold. Cabello, I think Todd is leaning toward, let's just go back. This is way above our heads, and explain to the Chamberlain we can't do this. And that's true. Really, 8 days of travel in the Davokar. By the time they get to Malima, they're going to be completely, if they even survive. And they have no way of healing. They don't have bandages. They don't have medicus. They don't have herbs. They don't have a lay on hands. They have zero way to heal beyond sleep, beyond rest, which is 1 point a day. Technically, they would have to hex crawl back for 2 days. They may not survive just going back, right? If we did that. I've offered, of course, to do the traditional Symbaroum, where we'll have an interlude. I'll describe the travel to Malima, and that would start scene 1, Malima, right? And then they can investigate, talk to people, and see what Malima is all about, and try to find this elf, try to get a lead on this Iron Pact elf that attempted to persuade the Chamberlain to murder the Queen by holding his family hostage. He ended up killing the son of the Chamberlain, and he ended up murdering his family but stealing his grandkids. And our party rescued the grandkids, and that's how they became ingratiated with the Chamberlain, and that's how the Chamberlain became an ally. And that's how the Chamberlain offered that he would provide them work as agents for the crown. And this was their first job. This was the first job that the Chamberlain had asked them to do. So we'll see how they want to go. Either we can rotate, and again, David would be back in the saddle, or again, we can continue this as a hex crawl home or a hex crawl further, or we can just go with the traditional Symbaroum setup, where they would an interlude, how they work their way through the Davokar to get to Malima, right? And then we start with what is Malima and what's Malima about. But anyways, great fun. Had a great time. I love Symbaroum. There is no doubt, though, if you purchased the starter box and that's your only experience with it, you would definitely come away feeling differently about what Symbaroum is than my initial first few years with Symbaroum, which has been the core book only. And then I added the monster book earlier this year before I started running sessions, as I thought I was going to be running a campaign for my locals. I'm not a big 5th edition guy. I've said this before. Brian, of course, wanted me to run Symbaroum 5th edition for them. He owns the Ruins of Symbaroum, I think is what they call that. And last night we had a great conversation about what it is really that makes this, in my opinion, better than most D20 games, because your hit points, your toughness never goes up. And the creatures, same way. The creatures aren't necessarily, as the creatures get more dangerous, it's not so much that their hit points get bigger. So we just end with these huge hit point fights. That's what Symbaroum gets right. Hit points, the game stays vulnerable no matter how competent they become. They don't become superheroes, but they become very good and very competent. David last night, with his ability, was able to attack twice and was able to add damage to fleeing enemies. And he was able to waylay these robbers very quickly. He looked like a badass warrior. And that's exactly what you want when you've created a character that you perceive as this very competent warrior. But he's still got 10 toughness. Again, 1 or 2 hits from, say, a rage troll, and David be unconscious, right? Bit and poisoned by meerkats, a pack of meerkats, you get bit a couple of times, plus poison, you're in trouble. Plus there's corruption in the game, which can affect you and cause all kinds of problems. Symbaroum is, to me, it's a masterpiece. The hex crawl, again, if all they wanted to do was the expedition, go in, find the ruins, get some treasure, go home, last night we would have finished. They would have done the bridge. They might have said, okay, there's no real treasure here. Let's go on one more day. And they would have headed in any random direction. We would have rolled for ruins and monsters. They would have found the Eder herd. They would have come away with a box with a doll with golden needles in it. And they would discover the value when they take that back to Thistlefold to sell it or whatever. And they would then return, which would have been a 2 hex crawls home. So that's very, very cool, but completely 10 times more dangerous than what we've been doing from the core rule book, which is very interesting, right? Which also shows maybe we've all been too tame with our Symbaroum kind of interlude / scene setup stuff. Maybe we're a bit too tame, but we haven't been in the Davokar. We've been in Civilization, Blackmore investigating a murder. We've been in Karavosti, taking a Prios priest hostage, not hostage, kidnapping Adele. Great session there. We've really spent more time doing interludes, interlude Dell, interlude to get us to Karavosti, and then David and I are on the ground trying to find this guy and take him captive and bring him back. Interlude home. So we didn't have to actually travel through the Davokar on a hex crawl, which is, again, ideal. But if you bought the starter box and just wanted to play Symbaroum and do a traditional kind of hex crawl where all you're looking for is a ruin so you can explore it and get some treasure and go home, it works for its 29. I think this was $29.99 for this box set, $30, right? So I would tell you though, however, it does a disservice, I think, to the core rulebook. And I hate to say it, but these rules were provided, I think, with a GM screen or another module that came out maybe with or sometime around the core rulebook. The core rulebook doesn't have any reference to any hex crawling tables or adventure tables, 0. So the core rulebook leaves 100% completely out these ideas. So if you didn't buy, like me, I don't buy GM screens. Number one, I don't use them, and I don't use pre-written material. And I bought the starter box because it just come out. I was like, I'm definitely gonna grab that. And I had no idea it had these hex rules, these expedition rules. So it's very cool. It adds to the game, but it's a completely different experience. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's nice to know that's an option if you want to enjoy Symbaroum in a more traditional, old school, open hex crawl, West Marches style of gaming. So thank you for listening, everybody. Have a wonderful week. And again, I don't know if I'll be doing session 11 part 2, or we'll be just rotating the GM seat, and we can do an interlude description as to why they've come running home since the Rise did. Dell may or may not take over Bonner, who's his apprentice. Maybe he'll make Bonner and make a PC out of Bonner, maybe not. But Bonner does live as the NPC apprentice of Dell. So we'll see. All right.